I'm always on the hunt for controversial monuments and memorials to World War II, and we're standing here in front of the mausoleum of Staf de Clercq, who, in the aftermath of the Great War, was a prominent Flemish nationalist and during World War II, a collaborator with Nazi Germany. Shockingly, his mausoleum and his association with the VNV, which was a World War II collaborator group, is pretty well marked on Google Earth, but you still have to know what you're looking for. This mausoleum is pretty recent. You can see it was made by concrete, and it doesn't date back to World War II. The reason for this is actually pretty complicated. Initially, Staf de Clercq wanted to be buried in the Castres cemetery, which was in his personal will, but because he led this militant group, they wanted him to have a state funeral, which took place in the Brussels Cathedral. But complications set in, which I'll detail shortly. What I think is so fascinating is that on this more modern mausoleum, you have the lion of the Flemish volunteers. And it's at the end of this road, and what I wanted to point out about his unusual burial arrangements is that he was buried in the Castres cemetery apparently for only 1 year, but because the VNV was celebrating 10 years of its existence, they decided to move him up to this spot overlooking Kester Heide, which is where the VNV and Flemish nationalists would hold their rallies in the aftermath of World War I. The Germans thought that this was all very well and good because they were nationalists, they were anti-Semitic, and they were pro-Germanic, although a lot of them did have some bone to pick with the Nazis. For the most part, the VNV was mostly lockstep with Nazi Germany. After he died, and he was buried here after a year, there was a partisan movement which, once Normandy happened, they saw fit to destroy his grave, and he was buried in a more or less unmarked plot in the Leerbeek Cemetery, and that's where he stayed until 1968 when the Flemish Militant Order, the VMO, came and dug him up. Now, the unusual part about his funeral is that he wanted an official funeral in the Brussels Cathedral, but they denied him this because the bishop refused to eulogize it. And after that, they said, well, we'll hold it inside of the royal palace. And again, there was a refusal to eulogize it. So eventually they tried to petition the German government, and the Germans refused because they didn't really care for Flemish. They cared for Germany. And this is his actual grave in the cemetery in Asse. And the poem here reads, as near as I can tell, "It will always be my highest poem that I never let you be guided by personal interests, but by the higher love for my faithfulness to my people." And what's so unusual about this is the VNV's logo is in the bottom left corner of the grave there. And you can see his grave is up here, not too far from the military plot in the Asse cemetery. And the VNV symbol is at the bottom left corner there. And it's interesting, in the Netherlands and in Belgium, a lot of these symbols are pretty clearly marked to this day. And anybody would recognize that flag if they saw it, at least anybody with a bit of historic background of their local area. And I think it's a pretty pointed reminder that they went over this in silver paint so that even if you're standing right next to it, it's kind of hard to recognize what it says on the graves. And over here, just a couple hundred feet from him, are the Belgian veterans of World War II. Most of these people would have served in the Battle of Dunkirk or throughout the war, and these are not all war dead. Most of them actually lived, and this is a monument to the war dead, but most of them survived the war. And what I think is really fascinating is the Commonwealth graves over here. These men all died on the 18th, very young, all younger than myself, and they died during the defense of Antwerp. And you can see a bit of German propaganda about that here.
Der Befestigungsgürtel Antwerpen ist überwunden. Deutsche Stoßtrupps stehen am Rande der Vorstadt. Ein feindlicher Panzer greift an. Volltreffer!